Well, let's begin our time this morning in meditation, getting ourselves into a comfortable position, one that won't be a distraction, and bringing ourselves into a heightened state of alertness, awareness, being aware of all that is within and without. Not pushing away anything, but including it all. And letting it be. From this state of alertness, noticing, asking ourselves, where is my attention focused in this moment? And if attention is fully focused, 100% focused in and as pure being, simply remaining. But telling the truth about it, if there is the least bit of attention focused on thought, on experience, using this very recognition as a vehicle inward, by first getting in touch with the full experience of the moment. What am I experiencing right now? Beginning with the body and scanning the body, head to toe. Noticing any sensations that may be present. Not doing anything about them, not analyzing them, just noticing and continuing to scan. As if it were a machine scanning the body. In a similar way, noticing any emotions that may be present. Noticing even the most subtle of emotions that might be felt as a mood, an attitude. Not doing anything about it, just noticing. Not letting anything escape our notice. Also, in a similar way, noticing any thoughts that may be present. Even the most subtle movements of the mind that might not be a fully formed thought, noticing. Being alert. And with this whole experience, body, emotion, thought, letting it all be there just as it is. A simple acknowledgement of what is in the moment. from this acceptance of what is. Asking ourselves, who's experiencing this? Who's thinking? Who is aware of all of this? Feeling the answer before the words. Verbally expressed, I am. I am. Now feeling I am. Not I am this or I am that. Simply I am. Relaxing into I am. Simple existence itself. Resting here, in and as pure being. That which must be before we can be anything. Relaxing into simple beingness itself. With attention resting here, in and as I am, being. If thoughts rise, they can simply be observed. Not doing anything about them, not trying to suppress them, and not following them. Simply observing as a thought rises and as it dissolves of its own accord. Doing nothing about it. Continuing to rest in and as I am. Pure awareness. Remaining alert. When thought stops, sometimes the mind goes unconscious. Being alert to that and not going there. Being alert in thoughtless awareness. Resting in the balance between thinking and unconsciousness, between fully awake and thinking and asleep or unconsciousness, resting in the balance point between. If attention starts to follow thought, gently and firmly returning attention inward. Who's thinking? I am. Relaxing back into I am. Being alert, noticing where attention is focused, staying alert, fully present. Resting attention in thoughtless, pure awareness. Fully aware and yet without thought. Not following any thoughts. If sleep starts overtaking you, take responsibility to remain fully alert, doing whatever it takes. Opening your eyes, standing up, taking full responsibility for one's own attention. As often as attention goes out into thought, withdrawing attention inward. Now remaining with attention inward. Being alert and fully present on our call together. Before we begin the daily messages, being alert as we hear the words of our Ramana, Aham's Ramana, in his prayer of invocation. We are now in the presence of pure being and immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, wisdom, and truth. We acknowledge this presence and this power as the one eternal Spirit and fully accept the simple truth that our world is now manifesting according to its perfect law from the one substance of pure love. The daily messages, for those of you who are new to the call, the daily messages are sent out 5 days a week by email. to the email address that you've chosen. And if you're not on the daily messages, just send an email from the email address that you want your daily messages sent to. Send an email to ahamcenter, cntr@ashboro.com, and you'll be put on the list. These are little snippets of a book that we're all reading together. And the book that we're reading right now is Conscious Immortality, which is actually out of print, but this is a way for us to read it verse by verse together and be with it. Bhagavan Ramana's teaching is, there's no fluff, and so it's very difficult to read through the book as we are used to reading books. But this gives us a chance to contemplate each day, each verse. So the part in Conscious Immortality where we are, Conscious Immortality is recorded either questions and answers or simply statements of Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi. And they're organized by topic. So we're just now finishing up the topic of reincarnation and beginning the topic of the meaning of religion. And as I looked at this, with that, the one sent out on last Sunday of reincarnation, I realized, well, that's actually part of religion too. I mean, that's a belief system. The notion of reincarnation, and people get all caught up in that. Wanting to know, wow, what am I going to come back as? Can I get off the wheel of reincarnation? It's endlessly fascinating for some folks. And that's part of the whole belief system of religions. So this isn't actually too different. These are all part of that. So the daily message that was sent out, all of these are just statements. There are no questions and answers for any of these messages that were sent out this past week. The one that was sent out on last Sunday, Ramana Maharshi says, the body is born again and again. We wrongly identify ourselves with the body and hence imagine that we are reincarnated constantly. No. We must identify ourselves with the true self, capital S. The realized one enjoys unbroken consciousness, never broken by birth or by death. How can he die? Those who think I am the body talk of reincarnation. To those who know I am the self, there is no rebirth. Reincarnations exist only so long as there is ignorance. There is no incarnation, either now, before, or hereafter. This is the truth. Now we move on Monday, the message sent out on Monday, the meaning of religion. Ramana Maharshi states, all creeds are just preliminaries for the masses, leading up to the real truth of the self. The religions are not necessarily the highest expression or the highest wisdom of their founders, who had to consider the times in which they lived and the mental capacities of the people. And it goes on Tuesday, the highest wisdom is too subtle for most minds. And so a whole scheme of worlds, gods, bodies, evolution, etc. had to be given out because people seemed to find it easier to believe all these things rather than the simple truth of the one reality, the self. Thus, reincarnation, astral planes, survival after death, and so on, are true, but only from a lower standpoint. It is all a matter of standpoint. And even though we don't consider all the talk of planes of perceptions as religion, that's actually getting right into religion. The fourth state or the fifth state, just really looking at, and Bhagavan warned about this, not to get all caught there. Our Ramana warned about that, not to get caught there, because it is, to our minds, endlessly fascinating. Because it's neat and new and not commonly understood. So therefore, it's fascinating. So we really have to watch, being careful not to get fascinated and off the track of simple realization. Simple truth. Ramana Maharshi goes on. From the highest standpoint, that of the real self, capital S, all else disappears as illusory, and only reality, capital R, remains. It is true that subtle astral bodies exist because in order to function in the dream world, a body is necessary for that world. But it too is real, only on its own plane. Whereas the one self is always real, always and eternally existent, whether we are aware of it or not. Hence, it is better to seek that, because the other bodies are only conditionally real. In the message sent out on Thursday, an ordinary Christian is only satisfied when told that God is in some far-off heaven, not to be reached by us unaided, that Christ alone has known him, and he alone can save us. So, when told the simple truth that the kingdom of heaven is within him, the Christian is not satisfied and will read far-fetched meanings into the statement. Mature minds alone can grasp the simple truth in all its nakedness. As I read that last message this past week, I remembered Jehovah's Witnesses come around pretty frequently in this area, and I remembered sitting on my front steps talking with a woman who had come to the door, and we talked about that passage. And she said, no, but it's impossible. It's impossible for God to have been within those people because they were Pharisees. And so God couldn't be in Pharisees, could only be in the chosen ones. It's like, well, so how were they living then? How were they standing up and moving around? And she had never considered that. But coming from her perspective, I tried to get from her perspective and really look at how the world looked from a particular creed. And so we talked a good long time, because I wanted to see, how does it look from her perspective, from the Jehovah's Witness, at least her interpretation of the Jehovah Witness teaching. How does it look? And getting in touch with, for me, we've got the sponsorship program in Aham, and there are the 10 conscious principles which are available on the website. But when you're in the sponsorship program, those 10 conscious principles, which can seem so abstract, are really brought home. When you're in the sponsorship program, there are exercises that you take yourself through, and you have a sponsor to go to say, I really didn't get number 2. Can you help me out here, or whatever? But one of the things that is looked at is beliefs, really examining our own belief system. And that's early. That's only conscious principle number 2. That's really early in the game. But really looking at that and making that a part of our daily life. And that's one of the things that's recommended, is to catch your beliefs as they arise in the course of daily life. And really noticing, for me, what is it that I believe in? And part of the conscious principle number 2 exercise is to really, as soon as you recognize a belief, examine, where did it come from? Where did that belief come from? What thought processes gave rise to that belief? Really examining the belief, trying to see, where did it come from? Parents, teachers, something that was read, religious authority figures in our life. And some of those beliefs are fairly obvious, at least they were for me, and then some are more subtle. I was visiting my daughter in Boston this past weekend, and she is Jewish. We went to a Shabbat service, and everybody else was reading Hebrew, so luckily she gave me a book which had the transliteration and the English translation. And I realized what we were singing, everybody knew the tune except me, what we were singing was the Psalms. And it was a large part of the service was the Psalms. Well, I was raised with the Bible, and I was reading the English translation of Psalm 97. It's like, really? This is Psalm 97? I mean, the Torah and the Old Testament should be the same. They came from the same original Hebrew text. And it dawned on me, yeah, but for how many centuries has it been being translated again and again? And now this is what the Psalm 97 looks like for the Jewish faith. And there may be multiple translations of the Torah, I don't know. But I know that there are multiple translations of the Christian Bible, and to see how that trajectory, the same origin, and everybody's taking it literally. Wait a minute, it wasn't even written in English originally. How could it be taken literally? What does that even mean? And really looking that I had a belief that I didn't recognize about what Psalm 97 actually looked like, and I was looking at it and thinking, wait, this isn't Psalm 97. Well, I don't think I would have known that if I hadn't really examined. So I stopped singing. It wasn't that hot anyway. I stopped singing, and in that moment was really examining some beliefs that I didn't know that I had. Really looking at, well, where did it come from? Where did my notion of what the Psalms came from? Where did that come from? Really looking carefully at our own beliefs. I know there are some of us on this call who have gone through Conscious Principle 2. And anyone else who has examined their own beliefs. Is there anyone who would like to share what their insights have been as they examine their own beliefs, perhaps on an ongoing basis? Oh yes, Doug reminds me that if you're joining us by phone, press *6 to unmute your line. And if you also muted your physical phone, you'll have to unmute your physical phone as well. Mm-hmm. Stands up here.
Hi, Linda. Hi, everybody. Two things come to mind with regard to beliefs. And this thing of looking at my beliefs, and actually something happened with it many years ago, after having been involved in for only a few years, actually. I began to actually get in touch with and recognize how much the whole basis of my life had been based on beliefs. And having been so identified with them that when they started crumbling, so to speak, it felt like I was crumbling. Mm-hmm. Because what came with it was the feeling that, man, if I don't have any beliefs, then how am I going to be able to function or protect myself? And I won't be right anymore. It's interesting, I was sitting there, attempting to bring up an example, but I realized right now examples aren't coming, but I can certainly tune into the feeling that used to be, and still looking to see where I might slip into a belief about even somebody, or based on how I've seen somebody say maybe act for a certain period of time. Well, even my belief about, well, that's the way they are. That's still a belief, even though I've seen certain actions occur that would maybe to my mind, to the ego, give evidence of being right about. Well, I know I'm right because they've done this, blah, 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 and they've done it so many times. So after you do it 3 times or 5 times, then that means it's not a belief. I'm right. And just seeing how the ego will use that, even after having gone through a pretty extensive time in a home when Ramana was really honing in on that stuff about belief systems and philosophies and concepts, and how much I or one might be living conceptually and from beliefs, and first not even seeing it, but then even after that to see how it can become it can get sophisticated, and still my ego not give up its beliefs. It just gets more evidence.
Right.
It gathers more evidence to prove that this is not a belief. Well, Ramana is not right. I know he's not right. And just seeing all of that, and how easy it is to fall into that and not even know it, and how it is a trap. And so I appreciate your bringing up about this. And the other thing in regard to what was coming as you were sharing about the fascination of the mind with all the different states, and having read something, it's a pretty significant book by one of Ramana Maharshi's enlightened students or devotees, whatever name you want to give to him, where he talked about the 4 or 5 different states of enlightenment or whatever. But And he shared that to come back to the point that he wanted to make is that with the Maharshi's teaching, it cuts through all of that, because it doesn't matter if there are however many states there are. What is the underlying state that's prior to all of that? That is the truth. And so when I remember reading that, and I was like, whoa, that does kind of cut through all of it. And thank God I don't have to get involved in all of that.
Right.
It's different states. So thank you for this.
Yeah. Thank you, Stan.
And now it's 6 times. If I see it 6 times, it's not a belief.
Oh, there's progress.
I'm progressing.
Linda,
Yes, Frankie.
examples just poured into my brain. Just the opposite of what Stanley was sharing. And I believe one of the first big ones that, as I got into that big, I was working on something with the death of one of my parents, and I was just totally wiped out for about 13 years behind that death. When I arrived at it was my father, and I loved him very much. And what I came to see, if I can identify where I fell in the soup as a child from just bliss, natural state, it had to do with the belief system around that adults would never do anything wrong. And they knew it. They knew what they were talking about, and they were infallible. And that moved from the outer world away from my family to in my own family, seeing how that I had set my parents up that same way. And I'm not saying I'm over all of that. I even at the gathering could see just recently how I still had some remnants of is infallible, and the people involved, and that everything is always going to be done the way I thought was right. And I'm just grateful that I am in this teaching, and more so every day of my life, because the lessons are still coming, and they're good ones.
Yes.
For me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Frankie. That's where humility comes in, doesn't it? That we're never done seeing and never feeling like, oh yeah, I've already done that. Oh yeah, no, put that on the shelf. I don't need to work on that anymore. And that's
You're
that.
riding for a fall.
Yeah, exactly. And that open humility is, I think that Ramana called it teachability. That open humility is really absolutely necessary in order to continue this path. Yeah. Thank you, Frankie.
Thank you so much. I'm good.
Bye. Doug is here.
Good morning. This has been an area of my concentration and my practice. The first part of the inquiry is being aware and living that every moment, of tuning into what is going on. And as I do that, what I find is these beliefs are very subtle. Mm-hmm. Every restriction I put on myself, prosperity, scarcity, can do, can't do. These things are all part of this history that's accumulated, none of which is true. So there's the practice of inquiry, is getting back to that original state where none of these things were present.
Mm-hmm.
And that state has no restrictions. Every judgment I make is about a belief. Every conclusion I make about something is a belief. And the beauty of it is, in going through this, is to see that none of them is true, yet I live as though they are.
Mm-hmm.
So intellectually that's pretty easy to say. Putting it into practice is quite another thing. And of course, hence living the inquiry every second. And that being aware, to me, is absolutely the crucial step, because without that, it's flying blind.
Yeah.
Absolutely flying blind. Until you run into a tree, and then you say, oh, there's a tree there. Of course, I ran into it at 30 miles an hour to find out that it was there. Or I can be present and say, it's a tree. Okay, and that's less painful than running into it.
Mm-hmm.
Although the lessons are not quite as great as when you run into it. But,
Yeah, you can't avoid the lessons if you've crashed.
It's all the scar tissue I carry.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's what came up for me as you were talking about it. That when I first did Conscious Principle 2, I was looking for the big hitters, having been in recovery from multiple religions, that look at all of it. That was a sharpness test. Looking at this to see all these beliefs that were not only held as true, but man, you better believe them. You're coming in this place. And okay, those are fine. They're there. But the ones that are really hard for me, at least, have been difficult because they're hard to see. Are these subtle ones about, well, I don't know if I can do that or not. I don't know if that's possible. Well, maybe I ought to wait. And all these restrictions and all these little caveats that I put on myself are all beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And not one of them is true. So, what's for lunch?
Yeah, and getting us back behind, that's the inquiry, getting us back behind the body, because all beliefs belong to the body and the mind. And that's even the belief that we can do it. That's all part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Linda.
I wanted to read a bit as I guess there's about 10 more minutes, Jim. So let me read. I'm reading from Ramana Arunachala by Arthur Osborne. Arthur Osborne was an enlightened devotee of Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi. And this little book has it's a very succinct summary of Bhagavan Ramana's teaching. And there's a section here that essentially looks at religions and belief systems without explicitly saying so. He says, the task performed by Bhagavan Sri Ramana was to reopen the direct path of self-inquiry, which had become too arduous for our spiritually dark age. This path stands, so to speak, at the source from which the various religions diverge, and can therefore be approached from any side. Whether there are many or few who take it is not the question, only that it has been made open. In itself, but for the grace of Bhagavan, it would be the most inaccessible to modern man on account of its very simplicity and directness. And we just looked at that as about how we need lots of steps, lots of interest for the mind. This is really too simple, too direct. How could it possibly be true? How could we really get to the silence at the core of our own being just by asking, who's thinking? And who is this I that's thinking? Way too direct, way too simple. It can't really be. Osborne goes on, and yet it is the most accessible, and in many cases the only accessible path. From the contingent point of view, since because of its very directness, it requires no ritual or forms of worship, no priesthood or congregation, no outer signs or special observances, but can be practiced in the workshop or kitchen or city office, as well as in the monastery or hermitage. It also requires no great burden of theory. Its description as the path of knowledge sometimes leads to the idea that it is more philosophical than other paths, but the opposite is true. It is the sword that cuts through the Gordian knot of philosophy. And I'm going to skip down. The whole intricate theory of posthumous development falls away. Posthumous development like heaven and hell, what's going to happen when I die, all of the things that most religions have that all figured out into a structure and what you must do to go to the proper place after death. And so the focus is largely on that. So, back to Osborne. The whole intricate theory of posthumous development falls away, since it is necessary to discover what you are now, not what you will be when you die. The complex yogic and tantric and religious sciences, the techniques for developing all of the physical powers and modalities of humankind are superfluous, since you are not all that, but the self. The vast fabric of spiritual cosmology expounding the stages of devolution from the formless substratum down to the state of physical man, and the stages of man's return to that formless state, does not arise when the cosmos is to be looked upon simply as a dream from which to awaken. On all these branches of religion and spiritual science, Bhagavan usually refused to answer questions, repeating that what is needed is to concentrate on the self that you really are. The task is to extinguish the ego sense so that only the self, which alone was, is, and will be, remains in consciousness and sees all this panorama as its own manifestation. As an expression of this, Bhagavan often said laughingly, "You have only to disrealize unreality, and reality, capital R, will appear." The ways of undertaking this task are innumerable, but it will suffice here to divide them into the three general categories of religion, indirect spiritual paths, and that of the direct path of self-inquiry. The direct path of self-inquiry is to forget the ego and discover the self, not as one self discovering another, but by awakening self-awareness, by beginning, occasionally and imperfectly at first, but ever more constantly and powerfully, to be the self. It is in this sense that knowing is being. We've only got a couple minutes left. Let's just rest here in this silence, withdrawing attention inward into the stillness and silence at the core of our own being. Withdrawing attention into I am, into the amness, the beingness. It's wonderful being with everyone. Namaste.
Namaste.